Recording in progress.
Oh, thank you, because I know I don't eat. Yeah, I'm glad you didn't stop.
Hey, good morning. Wait a few minutes before we get All right. I see people are starting to connect, so we'll go ahead and get started. And I'm sure more people will be joining us. This week we are going to finish up chapter 5. The study guide has omitted the ending of chapter 5, and then in the next lesson it skips over chapters 8, 9, and 10. And so this week we're going to read through chapters 5, 6, and 7, or pick up where we left off after Ecclesiastes chapter 5 verse 7. We're going to pick up in verse 8, and we'll move through chapter 7, and we'll finish out chapter 7, and then the following week we'll pick up 8, 9, 10, and then we'll close out the following week after that with chapters 11 and 12. But we'll go ahead and get started and open with prayer, and I'm sure more people will be joining us in just a moment. In the meantime, let us bow. Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for waking us up and giving us the opportunity to come and praise your mighty and righteous name, to learn a bit more about your word, to see how we can apply it to our lives, Father, and to always just have you in our mind, to be of that mindset, to always be seeking you, and to never let our fleshly desires hinder us from continuing to follow and walk after you, Lord, to chase you, Lord, so that we can know you, so that we can share you with others, and we could give the good news of the gospel to those who may uh, not know it, those who may have questions, Father, and to be a light to those who need to see that example. We thank you. We love you. We ask forgiveness, Father, and we ask that you teach us to be forgiving. We ask that we could continue to be in your presence, Lord, and that you give us the discernment needed so that we can walk according to your word and according to your will in this world. Thank you for everything. We love you and we honor you. And it's in your son Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. So we're gonna go ahead and open up here uh with I'm actually not gonna uh present my PowerPoint that I typically do. Um just because I really didn't finish it all that as well as I would have liked to. However, this week we're going to finish up, as I said, Ecclesiastes chapter 5, and we're going to start in verse 8. But we're going to discuss some of Kohelet's thoughts regarding the futility of wealth, the corruption and greed that's within, these systems of government. We're also going to touch on a series of proverbs that really focus on leading a life of wisdom. But then we're going to address these sort of limits of human wisdom. Just because we think we have wisdom, we think we know everything. And many times, and it's something that we've already said, the more we learn, the more we find out that we don't know everything, right? The more things that we come to understand, the more we understand we really don't get it. It's kind of one of those things that is a bit of a conundrum. The Kohelet says in Ecclesiastes 1, the more his knowledge grows, the more his sorrow grows, right? And so, it's one of those things where if we're just focused solely on learning, you think about people who are in universities, people in academia, their whole goal and purpose is to gain more knowledge. But if they never really apply that knowledge in any particular way, then that knowledge is as Kohelet would say, is meaningless. It's useless. That knowledge they have is like a mystery that they can't grab a hold of to even begin to understand it, right? So we're going to go ahead and open with Ecclesiastes 5. This week I'll be reading from the New Living Translation. Excuse me. I'm trying to have my water. So from the New Living Translation, Ecclesiastes 5, starting in verse 8, he says, "Don't be surprised if you see a poor person being oppressed by the powerful, and if justice is being miscarried throughout the land. For every official is under orders from higher up, and matters of justice get lost in red tape and bureaucracy. Even the king milks the land for his own profit. Those who love money will never have enough. How meaningless to think that wealth brings true happiness. The more you have, the more people come to help you spend it. So what good is wealth, except perhaps to watch it slip through your fingers? People who work hard sleep well, whether they eat little or much, but the rich seldom get a good night's sleep." This is really interesting, these verses here. So last week we ended the class with this sort of stern warning. Be careful to keep your vows to God, right? Fear him. That's really all that matters. Now the focus shifts towards the corrupt people that are in government, in the world, right? We know that if we're modeling Christ and Christ-like behavior, within the organization of the church, then there shouldn't be this sort of corruption. So now we've taken our focus from how things can be within the church, but how things are actually in the world, right? And so in verse 8, Kohelet, he shares that we shouldn't be surprised when the poor are oppressed by corrupt governments. Today, we don't have to look far to see corruption in government, from the international level all the way down to the municipal level. I'm reminded of a warning that Samuel gives to the people of Israel when they're begging him for a ruler. And we can see that in 1 Samuel 8, chapter 8, verse 10. And it's really a sad thing. Like, these Israelites, they're given this opportunity to just worship God. We think about what Christ has said, take my burden because my burden is light. It would have been the same thing with the Lord in, back when Israel was entering into Canaan, even after Israel was fighting off the people of the land and they had the judges, right? They come to Samuel and they're begging Samuel, give us a king, give us a king. So in 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 10, he says, so Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking for a king from him. He said, these will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to be his horsemen, and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of fifties, and some to plow his ground and to reap his harvest, and to make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his servants. He will take the tenth of your grain and of your vineyards and give it to his officers and to his servants. He will take your male servants and female servants and the best of your young men and your donkeys and put them to his work. He will take the tenth of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out because of your king whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. That's a stern warning that Samuel's giving the people of Israel. They're here crying to Samuel, give us a king. We want to be like the rest of these nations who have somebody to rule over them, when they're supposed to be the model of what it is to be ruled over, by the one true king, right? God. And here they are, they're crying that they need a king. And what do? They end up getting a king over them who, I mean, you start with Saul. Saul was, you could see he was incredibly zealous, but he wasn't working in the right steps, right? You see the warning that Samuel gives is that he's going to take for himself those things that belong to the people, but you know that would definitely be something that's not quite just. There's something wrong with that. But we see that even now, even though we in America do not have a king, we're still under government, right? We still have to be submissive to our governments so that we can be that model citizen, right? So that we can just continue to work and pay our taxes and keep our head down and just and do what we have to do. But that right there, it reminds, it says at the end of verse 12, or I'm sorry, at the end of verse 9, that even the king milks the land for his own profit. So even that alone, that warning that Samuel had given Israel, we see that played out here in verse 9, that even the king is going to be served from his own field, right? Moving into verses verses 10 and 11, typically we find that corruption in these sort of high places, especially corruption in government, is caused by some form of greed, right? So in verse 10, Kohelet, he shares the mystery of those people who seek these riches. They're never going to be satisfied. while those that work hard, they could go home, get some rest. And sadly, the man that's seeking wealth only has more mouths to feed and more headaches. And this we see in verse 11. And I pulled this from the King James version. He says, chapter 5, verse 11, he says, when goods increase, they are increased that eat them. And what good is there to the owners thereof, saving the beholding of them with their eyes? When I was thinking about that, when goods increase, they are increased that eat them. Supposing that that Solomon did write Ecclesiastes, you had to imagine, pardon me. Sorry about that. We have to imagine that he's clearly speaking from experience here. When goods increase, he's got riches, right? They are increased that eat them. Solomon's family was huge. He had 700 wives, 300 concubines. That's a lot of mouths to feed. Imagine all the children that he had with these wives and concubines, right? Not just the children that he had, not just the wives and the concubines that he had and the children that he had, but also the servants that he had and the children of the servants that he had. The chariots, the men that were in his army that were handling his chariots. He's has to care for all these people, right? But it's just an interesting thing to see how, when you have more to care over, these kind of you could call them headaches, you can call them stresses, worries, but they increase, right? So we see that even though a man, who doesn't have these same sort of riches, he can, we contrast this in verse 12. He can go and he can work and he can live his life, right? And when he's done with work, he goes home and he could rest. He's worked so hard that his body's tired, he just goes to sleep. I don't know how many times I've felt that. There's days when I can't sleep, and not because I have riches that keep me up, but just because I'm that kind of person. I'm more of a night owl. But we see this in the world now too. People who have less stress, less to worry about, they sleep easier at night. As to where we see here, the rich man, he doesn't sleep so easily, right? His mind is probably going with all the issues that he has to handle the day before and then the day coming, right? He has all those things going on in his mind. So it's almost like, it's exactly what they say. You got more money, you got more problems, right? So this is one of the issues of having such great wealth. There's no rest for those people who really pursue these riches instead of pursuing God and seeking God. They're pursuing those things that they wouldn't even be able to take with them. We're going to touch on that right now. But the everyman who provides for his home, or the single person that is focused on the end and not the means to the end, those who can truly enjoy every moment are definitely more blessed than those who lose sleep over their wealth. Verse 13, we read, "There is another serious problem I have seen under the sun. Hoarding riches harms the saver. Money is put into risky investments that turn sour, and everything is lost. In the end, there's nothing left to pass on to one's children. We all come to the end of our lives as naked and empty-handed as on the day we were born. We can't take our riches with us. And this, too, is a very serious problem. People leave this world no better off than when they came. All their hard work is for nothing, like working for the wind. Throughout their lives, they lived under a cloud, frustrated, discouraged, and angry. Even so, I have noticed one thing, at least that is good. It is good for people to eat, drink, and enjoy their work under the sun during the short life God has given them, and to accept their lot in life. And it is a good thing to receive wealth from God and the good health to enjoy it, to enjoy your work and accept your lot in life. That is indeed a gift from God. God keeps such people so busy enjoying life that they take no time to brood over the past. That's a nice sentiment right there when we think about, you know, this gift that God has given us to just be able to enjoy the time we have to rest, the time we have to eat and drink something and sit down and fellowship with our families. It's that's a really just it's so simple to have that kind of to have been given that as a gift. There's many people who don't have that opportunity. You know, we see it now. So many broken families. People aren't as connected. Families aren't as connected with each other, mainly because, you know, and it's our own fault. We've allowed things like social media and technology to kind of come in between what families used to be, right? Um, in any case, you know, I imagine that being a materialistic and financially wealthy person, it doesn't have it, you know, its own headaches. You know, Kohelet, he warns of what this wealth can lead to, and he guides us to a sort of simpler approach in order to navigate this world. You know, he warns that hoarding money for risky investments um, it's not a good thing. You know, he must have felt that sort of frustration of losing an investment in his life, and being king over Israel, he must have seen, you know, those profits and the losses of his kingdom. In the King James version, it's a phrase here. It's verse 14. He says, "But those riches perish by evil travail." That phrase right there in other translations is misfortune, or could be bad investments, as we read in the New Living Translation. So these are, you know, misfortunes and bad investments or business dealings. So doing this has left him with nothing to give his son as an inheritance. And we spoke on this a few weeks back, how, you know, this it's a good thing to leave, you know, your grandchildren an inheritance. So if you're leaving your grandchildren an inheritance, that it goes to follow that you're leaving an inheritance for your children. So not just for your children, but for your children's children. You know, you're trying to help set them up so that they they can deal wisely in their finances as well as they're growing older, right? Kohina reminds us that the rich, you know, that they have what they have accumulated is not going to be taken with them after death. We're reminded that we came into this world with nothing, and so shall we leave the world with nothing. You know, there's a series of scriptures that touch on this. Aside from this scripture here, you know, we know First Timothy 6:7. Paul writes to Timothy this very thing. You know, we came into this world with nothing. We cannot take anything out of this world when we die, right? Job 121, you know, he shares with his wife that, you know, he came out of the womb naked, and naked he's gonna leave the world, right? Psalm 49:17, and I actually found all these scriptures together. Psalm 49:17, he says, "For when he dies, he will carry nothing away. His glory will not go down after him." Proverbs 27:24, he says, "For riches do not last forever, and does a crown endure to all generations?" Luke 12:20 and 21 is a parable of the uh, the guy who built the barns for all his riches, right? He says, "But God said to him, 'Fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God." Um, and then finally, the rich man Lazarus, he says, "The poor man died and was carried away by the angels to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried, and in Hades, being in torment, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham afar off and Lazarus at his side." And that's Luke. Oh, sorry. That is Luke chapter 16, verses 22 and 23. And clearly, the rich man, he lived this flamboyant life. Lazarus was outside his window, hoping to be able to eat from the crumbs that fell from his table. And so when Lazarus died, he goes into Abraham's bosom. As to where the rich man, he did nothing good with his riches. So when he went to hell, he couldn't take any of his riches that gave him comfort in this life. He couldn't take any of those things with him, right? So, it's interesting. This theme has popped up several times in scripture. It's really a reminder of our own mortality, that the only real reason to accumulate riches is to do something good with them. Whether it be, of course, for God's kingdom, but also for our children, to leave an inheritance for our sons and our daughters, right? This actually stirs Kohelet into another, uh, to add another mystery, right? Those people that work but are always frustrated, they're discouraged and angry. This is another one of those mysteries. It's like all you're doing is working, but look at what all this work does to you. Look at what all these riches have done to you. You're frustrated, you're discouraged, you're angry. And so he goes on to declare that the joy we take in the work that we do is a gift from God. And this echoes back to chapter 2, which is a valid point. We are we as followers of Christ, focused on this gift from God. I'm sorry, focused solely on God and being happy with where we are financially. If yes, are we grumbling throughout our day? Are we just complaining of the sort of responsibilities that we have to meet because of these things that we've taken on? And if no, are we going to seek wealth and ignore Christ without first seeing what we're doing to advance his kingdom with, right? Are we just going to seek these riches and not seek Christ, not try to put into God's kingdom with the things that we've acquired? Are we just going to live our lives in this sort of loop of, I got to work, I got to eat, I got to sleep, and I got to make that money, I got to keep working, as opposed to I wake up, I seek Christ, and I allow him to navigate my day, right? In verse 18, we are reassured that it is a good thing to be content with what we have. God gives abundantly, health and wealth to those who seek him above all things and to those that do his will. Christ shares this similar sentiment in Matthew 6:19 through 34. And I won't read it, but just so you get a gist of it, um, you know, Christ is saying how where our treasures are, that's where our heart is as well. You know what? I'll read a part of it, but I won't read the whole thing. Um, and it's teachings on laying up your treasures in heaven, right? Verse 19. Let me just make sure. And I'll only read I will only read up to verse 21. He says, "Lay not up for yourselves treasure upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where the thieves do not break through nor steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." So it's one of those things that's very important, is we have to know what we are focused on. Are we focused on Christ, or are we focused on just getting paid? Are we focused on seeking him, or are we focused on our own needs as opposed of the needs of others, right? So to be content in these sort of things, it reminds me of the Philippian letter that reminds the church to rejoice, right? Rejoice in both good times and bad times, because this is a gift from God, so that we don't fuss or stress over the daily dealings that we have in this world. Moving through, before I keep moving, did anybody like to add anything, or do we have any comments or questions? Okay. Next, we're moving into chapter 6. Sorry about that. So chapter 6, verse 1, he says, "There is another serious tragedy I have seen under the sun, and it weighs heavily on humanity. God gives some people great wealth and honor and everything they could ever want, but then he doesn't give them the chance to enjoy these things. They die, and someone else, even a stranger, ends up enjoying their wealth. This is meaningless, a sickening tragedy. A man might have 100 children and live to be very old. But if he finds no satisfaction in life and doesn't even get a decent burial, it would have been better for him to be born dead. His birth would have been meaningless, and he would have ended in darkness. He wouldn't even have had a name, and he would never have seen the sun or known of his existence. Yet he would have had more peace than in growing up to be an unhappy man. He might live 1,000 years twice over, but still not find contentment. And since he must die like everyone else, well, what's the use? All the people spend their lives scratching for food, but they never seem to have enough. So are wise people really better off? So are wise people really better off than fools? Do poor people gain anything by being wise and knowing how to act in front of others? Enjoy what you have rather than desiring what you don't have. Just dreaming about nice things is meaningless, like chasing the wind. Everything has already been decided. It was known long ago what each person would be. So there's no use arguing with God about your destiny. The more words you speak, the less they mean. So what good are they? In the few days of our meaningless lives, who knows how our days can be spent? Our lives are like a shadow. Who can tell what will happen on this earth after we are gone? So now we're, you know, in the first three verses, Kohelet, he goes into great detail of the tragedy of this wealth that's accumulated, but someone else gets to reap the benefits. Again, this goes back to, I want to say it's chapter 2, where he's saying, what's the point of all this that I've made, all these things. Somebody's going to come in and be sort of they're going to be my successor, but are they going to be wise enough to do the same things that I did? Will they be able to handle these are they going to be able to deal as I dealt? And that's what the same sort of questions. And he's saying, it's a tragedy. What does it even matter, right? God's allowed us to have this wealth and given us this gift, but there's times where we can't even enjoy this gift. It's given to somebody else, and why did I even bother with this work, right? Excuse me. And so he goes on and explains that somebody who may have died at birth, or a stillborn child, right, a stillborn baby who never had the chance to live in this world, is better off. And this again goes back to excuse me, what he says, that it's better to have never even been born. He went from it's better to have never been born to it's better to have died at birth, right, than to have experienced this world and experienced this life. He thinks that the stillborn is better off because he's never had to experience calamities or trials or tribulations. The stillborn has more peace than the person who has lived even. And I like the exaggeration of it. It says he might live 1,000 years twice over. So let's say this person that is being compared to the stillborn has lived 2,000 years. They will still have no joy in comparison to not knowing the intricacies of this world and how they can bring you down, right? And it's a pretty dismal view. As we move through in verses 7 and 9, we're told that everyone is trying to eat, right? Everyone's trying trying to make some money so they can eat. Pardon me, I do apologize.
Could someone tell me what chapter we are on?
You know, so verses 7 to 9.
Ecclesiastes
we're told
chapter
every
7.
I like the phrasing in the New Living Translation. It says, all people spend their lives scratching for food, but they never seem to have enough. So we're then posed with these two questions. Are the wise better off than the fool? Because they're wise, are they in a better state, in a better state in life, in a better place in life than the foolish person? And then we move from the fool to the poor person, as if, being a poor person makes you foolish, right? So do the poor gain anything by having wisdom and manners? This is the second question. And so, the answer is really no. Or, we're told to enjoy what we have, whether it be great or little. But even this is also like, chasing the wind, or it's a vanity, right? So as we move through, verses 10 through 12, Kohelet, he shares that everything in this world has already been preordained. So to try and rationalize it, it only creates more frustration, because, he has no certainty of what happens after death. Then it would be completely pointless to try and argue with God about where we need to be individually in our lives. It's impossible to know when our end is, but it's always like a shadow. It's always creeping, right? It's around the corner. It could happen at any time. Our end is there, but we don't have any idea of when that end will be. So as I said, this is a fairly dismal view of that Kohelet shares with us. But it's important to remember that he didn't have that new covenant promise that believers of Jesus Christ have. We have already stated that we rejoice in all things, from our fortunes to our misfortunes, those good dealings and those bad dealings. We focus on those things. Take it small. We have to focus on that one thing, to rejoice in all things, and not be brought down by the issues of this world. Of course, there's going to be calamities, but we have to understand it and remember what Paul said in Romans. When these tough times come, we use it to help work our patience, and our patience helps work our hope, right? Our patience helps work our character, and our character helps work our hope. And so it's one of those things that we cannot focus on if we're letting this world kind of just beat us up and bring us down. It's just going to be more difficult for us as we walk in Christ. If we just let these things affect our attitude, we're not going to be that light that Christ has told us to be. We're just going to be grumbling. We're going to be disgruntled, right? And then we're going to be thinking on, well, if only it was like this, man. If only so and so didn't do this, I wouldn't have to do so much work. We're not rejoicing. We're not living as if we already have that inheritance that we're working so hard for. So yeah, this chapter 6, it's kind of a sad view, and you think about most of Ecclesiastes, it's pretty sad, where the preacher is in all of this. He doesn't know Christ. He may know of the prophecies, right? He knows what God told Adam and Eve and the serpent, but he doesn't know when this is going to happen. For all he knows, it's his child that's going to be coming into this world to change the way things are, right? His child could be the gospel, the teacher that the gospel is speaking of, right? The king that the gospel is always talking about. He doesn't know. And that's another thing that about him not knowing is that he continues to live in this world, not truly understanding, but thinking that he can change things. And so he's telling us right off the bat, at the end, it's like, everything in this world's been preordained, so you can't fight what God has already set. And that's something that a lot of times we don't really want to let it go, right? We think that we have a certain plan for our lives, but God has another plan. I think there was a preacher who made a joke and said, when man makes plans, God laughs, because our plans may not always be in accordance with God's own plans, right? So in looking from this sort of Christian view, it's important to know in our New Testament covenant that we are assured that if we seek God first, we have that inheritance, right? The stipulation of this inheritance is faithfulness. Are we going to allow ourselves to decide right and wrong, or are we going to trust God and continue to seek him in everything that we do? All right. So now we're moving into chapter 7, and it's verses 1 through 14. We're going to run through a series of proverbs here. Starting in verse 1, he says, excuse me. He says, a good reputation is more valuable than costly perfume, and the day you die is better than the day you are born. Again, this is it's kind of a sad way to look at things, but at the same time, you can see where the heart of the wise is at, right? Verse 2 says, better to spend your time at funerals than at parties. After all, everyone dies, so the living should take this to heart. Again, it's a sad way of looking at things, but it kind of shows where the thinking of a wise person is, as opposed to somebody who's not thinking about where they're at in life. Verse 3 says, sorrow is better than laughter, for sadness has a refining influence on us. Something about that passage right there, it makes me think of how, when we're feeling great, we're laughing and we're having a good time, we're not really thinking about the next thing, but what's going to happen. We kind of just go with the flow, right? As opposed to when we're sad, we mull things over, we think about things, and we kind of get led off track, and we start focusing our energies and our attention on another aspect. And so you kind of start, you step back and you're starting to look at the whole picture of things, maybe seeing how you can improve upon it, maybe seeing how you may have wronged somebody, and so you start feeling that sort of remorse or regret, and so you want to do things differently, and you start kind of like trying to formulate how to make your next step, right? As opposed to that person who is not thinking on those things, who's only thinking about having a good time. That's what we see in verse 4. He says, a wise person thinks a lot about death, while a fool thinks only about having a good time. That wise person, it may not just be death, but he's thinking about, all right, how am I going to set up this inheritance for those people that, I have fathered, for my children, for their children? What are they going to do when I'm gone? It doesn't necessarily have to be like, oh, well, I'm going to die, and there's not going to be, somebody to take care of these duties around the house, right? My chores, or no, it's really more like, what am I going to do for my children, if in case that I were to die and they're too young to go work for themselves? My wife has to take care of all our family, and they have nothing to hold them over. Sister Chris, is that your hand up right there? Oh, okay. So we kind of see this here, right? Verse 5, he says, better to be criticized by a wise person than to be praised by a fool. A fool's laughter is quickly gone, like thorns crackling in a fire. This also is meaningless. Extortion turns wise people into fools, and bribes corrupt the heart. Finishing is better than starting. Patience is better than pride. Control your temper, for anger labels you a fool. Don't long for the good old days. This is not wise. Wisdom is even better when you have money. Both are a benefit as you go through life. Wisdom and money can get you almost anything, but only wisdom can save your life. Accept the way God does things, for who can straighten what he has made crooked? Enjoy prosperity while you can, but when hard times strike, realize that both come from God. Remember that nothing is certain in this life. So, you know, excuse me. So, we follow these proverbs right here in chapter 7, and they all relate to advice and how to carry on life in glory to God. Being able to rejoice regardless of our circumstances is a true sign of our faith in Christ. Are we praising him with the same eagerness when we have nothing as we did when we had everything, right? That's one of the biggest things. These proverbs, they start off a little bit bleak, but as we proceed through them, they begin to soften up. In the first set, it shares that if somebody's wise, they are occupied with sorrow and pain in this world, as opposed to being carefree and foolish. And we saw that in verses 1 through 4. The next set of proverbs, they share that we are to consider a wise man's criticism beneficial. Excuse me. When we give in to fools praising us, then we become like them, right? We become foolish. We can look easily towards music. We can look towards social media that is shared nowadays as, the music as songs of the foolish. The social media, they get praised for doing foolish things. There's an app called TikTok where people are doing all kinds of challenges, and they get likes, they get followers, and they gain this sort of popularity, and they start climbing these kind of ranks in social media, and that's how they become well known and famous, is because they're doing something that isn't not always agreeable, or not always something that we should be doing as just people, right? I think of this young girl, and I'm sure a lot of people know who I'm talking about, but she became a rapper because of her antics, of her behavior. She's a girl on Dr. Phil that Catch Me Outside. How about that girl? Now she's a rapper. Now she's making all this money based off of her past behavior, which is, I don't care about anything. I don't care about this world. I'm going to do what I want. I'm going to make my money. It's kind of crazy. Her rap name is Bad Baby. She's being rewarded for acting like a bad child. And this is exactly where, we're seeing this sort of culture move into. She went from being a 15-minute star on Dr. Phil, and all of a sudden now she has all these opportunities to grow wealth. But the way she's growing the wealth is by putting into the minds of young people that if this is how you behave, you can be just like me, as opposed to the values that we once had, where if you work hard and you continue to seek God, he'll reward you for these things, right? In verses 7 to 10, Kohelet, he shares that we should be honest and fair. We should avoid pride. We should avoid anger and arrogance. And doing so, it develops our patience, and it controls our temper, right? We shouldn't live in the past, because we will never then really move forward. As we get into verses 11 through 14, he states that with money, it would be easier to do things along with wisdom. If we have wisdom and money, we have a more opportune chance to do more with our lives, right? But in either case, it's wisdom that can save lives, right? It may be a bit rough to say, but we can not expect to change what God has already set. So it's just best to enjoy what we have now. And so, it's true. And it's, as I said a little earlier, are we gonna trust ourselves to decide what's right and wrong? I think Adam and Eve trusted themselves to decide what's right and wrong, and ever since then, we've been trying to reconnect our relationship with God, right? Are we gonna trust Him, or are we gonna trust ourselves? Are we gonna trust God, or are we gonna say, no, I got this, I can figure it out, right? And that's one of the things where we typically falter in. If we just trust ourselves, we're never gonna fully trust God with His plan, because it's His plan that's going to get us into paradise with Him, into heaven with Him, into fellowship with Him. It's not until we trust Him that we could truly know Him, right? All right. Before I got one more bit before we close, but did anybody like to add or have a comment about what we just discussed right now? All right. So we're going to close out. It's chapter 7, verse 15. And I'll go ahead and read it through to the end. Then I'll go back to it. Excuse me. Verse 15, he says, I have seen everything in this meaningless life. That's every, the preacher here, it's kind of, it's kind of like in your face, right? He's like, I've seen everything in this meaningless life, including the death of good young people and the long life of wicked people. So don't be too good or too wise. Why destroy yourself? On the other hand, don't be too wicked either. Don't be a fool. Why die before your time? Pay attention to these instructions, for anyone who fears God will avoid both extremes. One wise person is stronger than 10 leading citizens of a town. Not a single person on earth is always good and never sins. Excuse me. Don't eavesdrop on others. You may hear your servant curse you, for you know how often you yourself have cursed others. I have always tried my best to let wisdom guide my thoughts and actions. I said to myself, I am determined to be wise, but it didn't work. Wisdom is always distant and difficult to find. I searched everywhere, determined to find wisdom and to understand the reason for things. I was determined to prove to myself that wickedness is stupid and that foolishness is madness. I discovered that a seductive woman is a trap more bitter than death. Her passion is a snare, and her soft hands are chains. Those who are pleasing to God will escape her, but sinners will be caught in her snare. This is my conclusion, says the teacher. I discovered this after looking at the matter from every possible angle. Though I have searched repeatedly, I have not found what I was looking for. Only 1 out of 1,000 men is virtuous, but not one woman. But I did find this. God created people to be virtuous, but they have each turned to follow their own downward path. So as we close chapter 7, the preacher here, he shares that although there is the opportunity to become wise or to be caught in the snare of the foolish, we should seek this sort of middle path. When I think about this middle path, I'm reminded of the teachings of Buddha, right? He said, don't live to one extreme or to another extreme, just follow this sort of middle path, right? But above all, what Kohelet is saying is that, the fear of the Lord is what's going to keep us from either one of these extremes, from trying to be too wise or living a life that's foolish. If we first put in ourselves that we will fear the Lord, that we will love and revere Him and respect Him and seek His word and His will, then in doing so will keep us from thinking that we can be too wise, from thinking that we're this know-it-all who's got it all figured out, or from thinking that I'll just do what I want and I can live however I want. and who cares what happens, right? Who cares who I hurt, and who cares if it hurts me, right? You know, first putting our faith and fear in the Lord will keep us from living either too far left or too far right, right? Um, we also, we come across a few more proverbs, and they sort of address the behavior that the wise should have. Wisdom is uh, looked at as being a wise person is looked at as being stronger than 10 mighty men within the city. But even the most righteous man can be at fault of sin. We see that the foolishness of being this sort of nosy busybody, it can lead to hearing things about ourselves that we wish we would not have heard, right? And it's only fair, since we've probably ourselves spoken bad of other people. I know I can say that on my own, of my own accord, that and it's something that I work on now. Gossiping, right? Try not to speak bad about anybody. Just if you have nothing good to say, just say nothing, right? But a lot of times I find myself in a place of frustration, and in a place where I want to let out my frustrations and vent them out. And what happens? I cause myself to sin by talking bad about somebody, right? I cause myself to stumble by thinking ill of somebody, and then not just thinking bad about them, but allowing that thinking to come out of my mouth and to show that to whoever I may be talking to, right? I sin against myself in doing those things, and it's something that I work on very hard now. I think about a lot of times at work. I do my very best to not speak about the person who worked before me, because I know what I have to say, and they're not good things. And so I have to eat my frustrations and just say, you know what? I give it to God and let him handle these things, because the more I let it occupy my mind, the more upset I become, the more frustrated I become, and it affects the way I work. It affects my attitude throughout my day, as opposed to just, just put your head down, keep working, man. Don't even worry about what so and so didn't do the day before, or what so and so isn't going to do the next day. You just run your race, right? And that's something that I've taken from, I want to say it's Philippians 2, where it says, we each have to work out our own salvation. I've applied that to life in this world. I have to work out my own dealings with people, and into a way where I'm not sinning against myself and bringing sin upon them, putting my frustrations out and creating more animosity between another person just because I'm not happy with the way they're doing things, right? In verses 23 through 25, Kohelet, he shares just how difficult it really is to gain wisdom. No matter how much effort you put into acquiring it, it always seems as if it's out of reach. And what ends up happening is, when we're seeking that wisdom, we end up falling into this sort of wickedness and foolishness. And so now, as finally, as we close out this week's lesson, we're given the same warning that the preacher in Proverbs gives concerning the foolish woman. And we see this in Proverbs 5 and 7. If we are not careful, we can fall into a trap, which really shows who our focus is really on, right? Are we focused on the Lord, or are we focused on our fleshly desires? Are we focused on how we act in this world with our own thinking, as opposed to putting ourselves in the thinking of Christ, in that mindset of Christ? So if we're not careful, we could fall into that trap. So the conclusion is that people are made perfectly in God's image. God created people, and I like the phrasing in here in the New Living Translation. He says, God created people to be virtuous, but they have each turned to follow their own downward path. We're made to uphold God and his standards, but because we have free will, we give ourselves over to our own devices. And this is something that, as believers of Christ, this is why Paul tells us to put on the mind of Christ, right? He tells us that because we've been buried in his into his death, we're also buried into his baptism. And that's why, old things become new, we become new creatures, and we should always keep that mindset that we're not like how we used to be. We need to continue to move forward and to be how Christ says we need to be. But yeah, that wraps up chapters 5 through 7. Did anybody like to add anything? Any comments or questions you'd like to add?
Brother
Before
Fidel.
we take a prayer request.
Brother Fidel. Brother Fidel.
I do apologize if I felt a little rushed. I was just trying to, I've been taking, again, I'm using the preacher's commentary. This one is written by David Hubbard. It's not the same commentary as the Job one, but that gentleman there, he likes to use a lot of the Hebrew language to share how we can better understand the scripture. All right, y'all. Do we have any prayer requests before we let out? Comments?
Brother Fidel, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Brother
Sister
Fidel?
Chris,
Can you hear me?
I think you're muted.
I can hear her.
I'm not muted.
Oh, you know what? I'm muted. I'm sorry.
I was just trying to determine out in Ecclesiastes, who is this preacher?
I'm sorry?
I was trying to determine in the book of Ecclesiastes here that we're studying from, who is the preacher?
The preacher?
Uh-huh.
So, there's a couple of ways that they look at this. So the preacher is also known as Kohelet. He's, the person who's giving this sort of testimony, but he's acting as two people. He's the author, and then he's also the preacher. And so it's almost as if he's giving himself an interview. He's interviewing himself and making these responses and asking these questions.
So the preacher is not Solomon?
So there's a lot of contention whether, and this is, it's really interesting because these ideas have been coming up probably over the last 100 to 200 years. Traditionally, people believed that Solomon wrote Ecclesiastes, but in the last few hundred years, scholars are starting to believe that Ecclesiastes was written at a later date, probably after Israel was released from Persian captivity, because there's some phrases that are borrowed. Excuse me. Some of the phrases are borrowed from Phoenician and Persian language. But what I think is interesting, most of all, is that if Solomon had all this wisdom and all this knowledge, these phrases would be nothing to him. It'd be just something that would roll off his tongue that could be applied at any time throughout, at any time, at any generation, really. But I'm of the belief that Kohelet, the preacher, is Solomon. But I want to make that distinction that here in Ecclesiastes, he is considered to be the preacher. But as we saw in I want to say it's chapter 1,
Yeah.
he gives a report saying that he was the king at one time, right? He ruled over Israel. He was able to how else would he have had all this knowledge and wisdom, especially when it came to riches, especially when it came to women, right? So I am of the belief that Kohelet and Solomon are the same person. They are not separate people, or that Ecclesiastes was written at a later date. I believe that Solomon did write Ecclesiastes at the end of his life, when he, once he is done all the evil things that he had done, as far as worshiping false gods and sacrificing to these idols. He's lived life, and he's seen how bad he went. How he veered all the way to the left, or all the way to the right, instead of continuing to seek God. But yeah, I believe that Solomon and the preacher are the same person.
Okay, because it's supposed to be the son of David.
I'm sorry?
The preacher's supposed to be the son of David.
Supposed to be the son of David, yeah. And we see that.
First verse says the words of the preacher, the son of David, king.
Yes. Ecclesiastes 1. And then,
Okay.
yeah, and so, but it's interesting because there's a lot of scholars that are trying to change that way of thinking. Trying to speculate more, I guess, than what should be speculated upon. I mean, as we saw, it's clear. He says, these are the words of the teacher, King David's son, right? There's verse 12 of chapter 1. He says, I, the teacher, was king of Israel and lived in Jerusalem. After Solomon's reign, Rehoboam, the kingdom was ripped apart. 10 nations of Israel were given to Jeroboam, and 2 nations of Israel were given to Jeroboam. So there really wasn't another king to reign over Jerusalem the way Solomon reigned. It was really only Saul, David, and Solomon that reigned over the entire Israel, right? If he was king of Israel, Israel is all the 12 nations, but after Solomon, the kingdom was ripped in two. There was no other king that ruled over all of Israel after Solomon. So, chapter 1, I believe, gives us more proof that it is Solomon who wrote Ecclesiastes, as opposed to maybe somebody in the royal line down the road, right? There wasn't a king after. Oh my goodness, I'm gonna go crazy trying to remember the chronology of it. But after they went into Babylonian captivity, there wasn't another king of Israel, because after Babylonian captivity, then they went into Persian captivity. And then after they were in Persian captivity and they were sent back to Israel, then they were under these different rules. They were under different rulers. They were under Darius. They were under Artaxerxes. They were under Alexander the Great. They were under Maccabean rule. Then they were under Roman rule when Christ was alive. So it's really, in my opinion, I don't believe that Ecclesiastes could have been written by anyone else but Solomon, especially having this sort of knowledge of the world and the way things work,
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, y'all. We'll go ahead and close out. I see a few comments here. I realized that very late, Sister Wilburn, of having y'all muted. I had my volume all the way down, so I couldn't hear anybody else responding. I do apologize. Yeah, Sister Bates is giving thanks for all the prayers for her surgery that we're glad she's recovering from. Sister Gwen is reminding us to pray for Sister Valeria Jones. She does have her surgery today at 1:45 for removal of part of her thyroid. And yeah, we'll continue to keep Sister Wilburn in prayer as well. Are there any other prayer requests before we let out?
Yes, add me. Can you hear?
Sister Kennebrew?
Yes, please add me. I'm dealing with a whole lot of things, And one of them is my car. And I had made contact with somebody who's supposed to be a reputable mechanic. And I think he's giving me the runaround. I'm not sure. I don't know if he was supposed to call me on Monday evening. He didn't. Then he called me. He did finally call me Monday evening and said that he was going to call me at 1 o'clock yesterday. And he was very emphatic that he would call me at 1 o'clock yesterday, and he didn't. So I'm trying to read the signs. I know things happen in our lives, but I need to get my car repaired, and he's supposed to be capable. So you all pray that the Lord guides me in the right decisions about this, and continue to pray for me for my health, and pray for my daughter and my grandchildren, please.
Amen. Are there any other prayer requests? All right, y'all. We'll go ahead and close out this week with prayer. And as I said earlier, next week we're gonna do chapters 8, 9, and 10. Since the study guide is not going to go over them, we'll go over them, and we'll discuss it and open it up. And then the following week we'll close out Ecclesiastes with chapter 11 and 12. But yeah, that'll be our plan for the next couple of weeks, and then after that, I believe we're moving into Proverbs. And we'll see how we can work Proverbs out, because it's there's a lot of things to be said about that book. But yeah, we'll go ahead and close out with prayer, and we'll meet back next week. Let us bow. Father, we thank you for this day and this opportunity to learn just a bit more about you, Lord, to seek you and seek those things that you would have us to know about you. We ask for discernment to apply these words to our life, Father. We thank you for your love, your grace, your mercy. We beg forgiveness, and we ask that we can be forgiving of others, Lord, that we can seek to be in your presence always. We come asking for prayers, Lord, for Sister Kennebrew as she continues to work out these issues with her vehicle. We ask that you continue to work on her health and heal her, that you continue to strengthen her so that she can be reconciled to her family, Lord. We're asking for prayers for Sister Valeria Jones as she's having surgery this afternoon, and the removing of part of her thyroid, Lord, that the doctor's hand will be guided successfully, Lord. We're asking prayers for Sister Wilburn and her family as they struggle each day, but that you make things easier and more bearable for them, Lord. We're asking prayers for Tiffany Grogan and her daughter Tiana Grogan. For Tiffany Grogan, that she can return to your love and embrace, Lord, that she can come back to you and know that it is only within you that anything is possible, Father. We thank you. We love you. We're asking for prayers also. Thanks for Sister Sonia, for the prayers that she received for her recovery, Lord. And we just ask, Lord, that you continue to work in us your will, that in every person we talk to and in everything we do, that your Son is the light that comes from us, so that people could see through the darkness of this world. We thank you and we love you. And it's in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Yes.
Amen. Thank you.
Everybody have a
Yeah,
great
you're
day.
very welcome, y'all. Thank you.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Be blessed.